And welcome, everybody, to this season wrap-up episode of the Assembly Call. I am your host, Jerod Morris. I will be joined tonight by Andy Bottoms, Ryan Phillips, and Zach Gropper, and we are going to break down the season that was for the Indiana Hoosiers in 2013-14. What went wrong, why it went wrong, relive some of the highs, some of the lows, and just break down what, by any definition, was a very disappointing season for Indiana. But we are not going to dwell all on the negatives. We are going to look toward the future, and I suppose for some people that may still be dwelling on the negatives, but I think we have some points, some things that may make you feel a little bit better about the future, hopefully. And if you have any questions about your brackets, we might save a little time at the end to talk about that too. And speaking of brackets, make sure you go to assemblycall.com/bracket, get in our bracket challenge. If you didn't see the post that I put up on Assembly Call earlier this week, we do have some unique prizes. And one of those prizes is for the winner. You can actually sponsor our banner moment during the non-conference schedule next year, hopefully the much improved non-conference schedule next year. Or you can actually get a spot on our panel for a game, and if you don't want to use it, you can certainly gift it to somebody else if you want to. But the winner's going to get that, and so make sure that you join in, get your bracket in, compete with all of us, with other Assembly Call listeners, and whichever members of my family decide to straggle in there as well. With that said, let's kick things off, as we always do, with the banner moment. And, of course, I try to keep my banner moment something positive because, again, it all began with looking at what moment from the game leads me to believe we're on the way to our sixth banner. And I have to admit that there wasn't a whole lot that happened this year that led me to believe that we're on track for that. In fact, I think in many ways this season was at least one, maybe two steps back from the last couple of seasons, which is why it was so disappointing. But I will start out with, I think, the main positive from this year, which is the growth of Yogi Ferrell as a scorer. Obviously, saw his scoring increase by about 10 points, saw him get that outside shot that he really didn't seem to have last year. And so I think when you look at this program looking forward and you look for building blocks, reasons for hope, having a sophomore guard who some people picked as a first-team All-Big Ten player, he was certainly at least a second-team All-Big Ten player, having him as the anchor of your team moving forward over these next 2 years is certainly going to be a positive for this team. And obviously Yogi has things he needs to improve, turnovers. He needs to, I think, embrace more of a leadership role. And I think hopefully as a junior and on into his senior season, he's able to do that. But I think when you look at this season as a whole, his improvement and his ability to step up as a scorer certainly was the main positive. With that out of the way, it doesn't leave many positives for the rest of our panel to discuss, but we're going to go around the horn right now and get their thoughts on this season. We'll start with Andy's bottoms line on this IU basketball season.
Well, I mean, the one positive I can think of is that in some way we were right. And when I say that, I mean that early in the season, after one of the first games, it might have been the LIU-Brooklyn game. Hell, it could have been all of them. We talked about, what a roller coaster this season was going to be. And I think we were right in some sense, although I don't think any of us would probably have guessed that the lows would be, what they turned out to be. And even to some extent what they've kind of gotten to after the season with the way some of the things have gone down since then. And, I think some of the highs were probably a little bit unsuspected as well. And so when I look back, I'll, on this season, to the extent that I'll remember it or want to remember it, I mean, I'll think a lot about the, flashes of great play that hopefully can turn into something more next year, but also the fact that those were not sustained and that there really wasn't the kind of growth that you look for from a young team over the course of the season, which kind of leaves us where you could go any number of ways, and you really, heading into next season, and you really couldn't talk me out of it. You can, I read your post, Jerod, about what next year could be and how that might be better, and I can see that side of the argument, and you could just as easily sway me into the next season being a whole lot like this year. And I don't think we have any way to know, based on the inconsistency of this season, what really awaits as we get into next season. And part of that is you don't know who's going to be on the team, whether it be, Vonleh going pro, transfers, all the other, kinds of rumors that will surely circulate as we get rolling here. But just a disappointing season that, even though I really was skeptical that the team was a top 25 caliber team before the preseason, in no way, shape, or form did I envision this season ending with this team not playing in any postseason tournament, and that fall from the preseason expectations not coinciding with some kind of rash of injuries or mysterious illness that has befallen the team. So it was an interesting season to say the least that gave us plenty to talk about. So I guess if nothing else, we can go back to that, and probably a lot of things to think through tonight and to look forward about, and hopefully, we're having a little bit more positive show next season, and hopefully a more positive season wrap-up show while I'm not watching NCAA tournament games.
You don't consider turnover-itis to be a serious illness?
Well, it's clearly serious. I think we all know that.
Okay, so let's go over to Ryan now for his final rant of the 2013-14 season. The final with Will Sheehy in an IU uniform.
First of all, turnover-itis is, for us, apparently for Tom Green's IU teams, is like the diseases that the drummers from Spinal Tap get. They just keep happening and nobody knows why. It's kind of that. But, for me, I think that the wrap-up on the season is, and I've read a lot, and, Jerod, your column about, how this team never, part of your column today was sort of about how this team never came together with the leadership and things like that. And I think that's the ultimate thing we learned from this season, was that there just wasn't the kind of leadership there had been in the past. And when those guys left last year, I mean, even guys like Maurice Creek and Derek Elston, we always talk about Hulls and Watford and Oladipo and Zeller, but, guys like Derek Elston and Maurice Creek, carried a lot of weight in that locker room, and everybody respected them. And when they, when somebody was screwing around, those guys, set them straight. And I just think that there was a huge vacuum, and to bring it back to someone like Will Sheehy, I just think that it was an insurmountable task for them to fill that gap. When so many guys who were respected leave, and you've got one senior, and then Yogi, who was a freshman last year, expected to just fill that void. And I think that the team struggled with it all year. There was no guy they could really lean on when things went poorly. And I think vocally and on defense and setting an example, Sheehy's a great guy for that role, but he had no one else with him. And I also think that, when it's a guy who's as inconsistent offensively as Will was for most of the season and for most of his career, that, he wasn't a guy you'd think would just take the ball in a tough situation when the freshmen are struggling, take it over, beat the defense, and score when it was needed. And so I just feel like that's the kind of guy who sets it. Someone who can do that is the guy who sets the example for everyone else and really sort of establishes things and sets the right tone and things like that. And there just isn't that guy on the roster right now. Hopefully, with these guys all getting a year older, I think Yogi will be able to have that. Will be able to hold that respect next year. Maybe some of the young guys. It's a huge opportunity for them to step up, to be leaders this offseason in the gym, working out, getting better. Maybe they can step up and be a leader. But it's just, there was such a void left behind by those guys departing last year that I just think that this team never had a chance to really fill that. Nobody stepped up into that role. Nobody embraced that role. Everybody seemed to kind of be looking at everybody else to do that and to be a leader. And I think that's the story of the season, because while you can blame turnovers and poor shot selection and things like that, there was nobody on the court to rein those guys in. And, you need to have that.
Yep, and the article they're talking about is available at assemblycall.com/hope. If you want 2,300 plus words of IU optimism about the future, you can go there. With that said, let's bring in Zach, our buddy who's in Bloomington, graduating this year, done a lot of work behind the camera with the IU interview series for us, and so we want to bring him on now and get some of his thoughts. And Zach, I'm particularly interested in your thoughts about how this season was received on campus. The change in the excitement level from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, and just your overall thoughts on this IU team.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what you'd expect throughout Bloomington. You saw in the beginning of the season, you saw a lot of optimism, and everybody knew that, there was a good chance that IU wasn't going to be nearly, maybe as high a seed in the NCAA tournament come the postseason as they were a year ago. But, the fact of the matter was most people expected them to make the tournament, just kind of keeping it simple. And when they missed that, when they missed that goal so widely, people were really upset, and people are still really upset. And unfortunately, I think Twitter is a pretty good representation of how Bloomington is feeling right about now. People are not very happy with Tom Crean. I really do not come across somebody who is in support of Tom Crean too often, which is really just too bad. I mean, I myself am a fan of his, and although I don't think as far as the X's and O's go, he's done his job, especially this year. I definitely would like to see him for at least a couple more years, and it's too bad that not a lot of others out there throughout Bloomington agree with me. But as far as positives go from this year, I mean, me personally, I would also want to bring up Yogi Ferrell, and just the fact that he has really done everything we've asked thus far. Although he does have to develop a lot more throughout the offseason, simply put, I trust him to. I think he's going to come out and prove to be the leader that most of us are going to, ask for him to be. And I think he's going to really help this team in that way next season, in addition just, to being a great scorer and hopefully becoming a better passer. And I'm really excited also to watch Troy Williams, Stan Robinson, and some of the others, Devin Davis and whatnot. And, although they didn't help us win games as much as maybe a lot of people thought they would going into the season, because of where they were on the recruiting rankings and whatnot, and just what we saw on their mixtapes. It's too bad, but we're probably going to have 2 or 3 more years for most of them, at least at IU. So I really am excited to watch them develop. And finally, also Noah Vonleh, although he also didn't help us win games as well as somebody of his caliber and his talent probably should, help a Big Ten team win games. It's looking like he actually might end up going, top 5, top 7, right about there in the draft. And if he can do that and, get off to a quick start with wherever he lands in the NBA, that's only going to help us, nab more 5 stars, and that's what we're going to need.
Good point, Zach, and kudos on your shot framing there with the basketball with the IU logo on it right over your shoulder. That's excellent work. Okay, so I think 2 biggest problems from this season, from my perspective, I think you guys would probably agree, is turnovers and just that lack of continuity, communication, the disjointedness on the team. And so I want to break those 2 elements down here real quick. And Andy, I want to go to you first and talk turnovers. Here's the thing with turnovers is I think there's really 2 reasons why we had so many this year. You look at it this year, and we're a team that likes to play fast. We were a young team. We didn't have shooters like we did last year or 2 years ago, I guess, that we could really outlet it to. And it led to just a lot of kind of crazy drives into the lane and, guys trying to make passes, when they've already jumped in the air, unsure what to do. And then, of course, you've got just the inexplicable ones where we're throwing it to nobody. And so, you look at those, and those are very frustrating. But turnovers are also just kind of systemic with this program. I mean, when you look at the numbers since Tom Crean has been here, Indiana's never finished in the top 100 in the country in turnovers. I think our highest is it's either 107 or 137. I can't remember exactly the number, but obviously the last 2 years we were a little bit better. The last 3 years before this one, we were between 19 and 20, and that's the best we've done. And this year, obviously, it ballooned back up to, we're in the 300s again. And so, with the way Tom Crean likes to play, there's going to be a certain amount of turnovers. This year, it was obviously ridiculous. And, if you cut out some of those turnovers, obviously you're going to get more shots. You're going to reduce some of the big runs that really killed this team. And if you just, if you're only turn the ball over 21% of the time this year, which would have even been worse than the last 3 years, I mean, I think you're almost looking at 3 or 4 more wins. And so it seems simple, but to me, when you really look at the season as a whole, the turnovers are that one thing that just kept on coming up, Andy. How do you view that, and how do you think that this problem gets solved moving forward, or does it?
I mean, as far as I guess what I would attribute it to, it seemed like there were more often than not, IU's offense was either out of control, as you said, where kind of moving too fast, wanting to get out on the break too much and really forcing things, or they were really stagnant when they were in the half court and would just pass the ball around the perimeter, and then you get down to the end of the shot clock and you're trying to find somebody to make a play, and there wasn't a lot of those in between moments where you had a series of cohesive offensive possessions where it became clear what the team was really trying to accomplish and how they wanted to run things. And, in the games where that was where those things did happen, I mean, the team played really well. That's obviously not a coincidence, but I think the system, quite honestly, they're going to need to play even faster next year. So let's assume that a Vonleh does leave. You're going to have a pretty small roster, almost no matter what you do. Even if you bring somebody in, you're not going to have a lot of depth inside.
Hey, Andy, just for the sake of fun, can we just assume that Noah stays and Lee from Temple comes? Let's just assume we're going to be giant next year, just for fun.
Okay, absolutely, because that seems like the most likely scenario. So yeah, I think but I do think they're going to want to do that more. They're going to want to get Blackman on the floor. Yogi's obviously going to play. Stan's going to earn minutes. Robert Johnson is there. You're going to be playing 3 guards more often than you're not, I would guess. And so in order to kind of use that to your advantage, you're going to want to play fast and use the fact that there's some shooters out there. Now maybe that actually helps because you've got somebody to kick it out to, and you're not driving the ball into traffic and getting lost. Maybe that helps. But I do think this team's going to have to kind of win with speed next year as you start to think forward to that. So I'm not sure that it gets better. To your point, it's not a new development. Even with pretty at least the same person playing point guard the last couple of seasons, you didn't see that get significantly better. I do think it will help to have additional guards on the team next year that'll help handle the ball a bit more. But I do think based on the pace of play and the style that they'll need to play next year, I don't necessarily see it going away. That said, I would shudder to think that it wouldn't get a little bit better if for no other reason than it had pretty much bottomed out this year.
Yeah, no kidding. You would think just by law of averages that it would get better. One way that it can get better is more accountability, I think, from the coaching staff. And so, Ryan and Zach, I want to get your guys' thoughts. You guys are obviously, big Crean supporters on the spectrum of IU shows. You guys are probably the firmest in Crean's corner. And look, there are legitimate reasons to support him. The guy's achieved a lot. But, I will say, and I've always been very supportive, but, as I mentioned in the article today, what happened over the last 8 games 2 years ago and then this season has given me some pause. And, particularly this year when you have a problem like the turnovers and when you have a problem like, Ryan, that lack of internal leadership, that disjointedness, that's really where the leadership needs to come more from the coaching staff. Obviously, every coach would love for his leadership to be internal, like he had with Victor and Cody and all those guys. But this was a year really where it seemed like the leadership needed to come more from the coaching staff. Both just in the direction of the program and even just in game, and putting your guys in better positions and holding guys accountable in game when they're doing things that you don't want them to do. I didn't see that a lot this year, and it's one of the reasons that I am a little bit concerned and why next year, now has become a bit more of a show-me year for Tom Crean. And so I want to get your thoughts on that, on his role specifically in, because obviously the buck stops with him. So isn't he ultimately accountable for why, the bugaboos of this team, the turnovers, the lack of communication, all these things, why that stuff never got better?
Yeah, I mean, look, because you defend Crean and because you're a supporter of him doesn't mean that he's infallible. I think that, yeah, he definitely has to take responsibility for what happened. I think that as a coach, it is your job to provide leadership. I think that after last year, where I think he could have been far more hands-off, given some of the guys on the team, this year, should have been the opposite. He should have been more hands-on. It should have been more pushing the team and not, trying to let them figure it out on their own. But at the same time, this year's a disappointment. You can't defend his performance this year. It's impossible. But that doesn't mean that he should be fired. I think that it's with Crean, he really has to get more involved and step back, take a look at himself, and find the gaps and the problems with the program and what needs to be fixed, and really take a look at what's wrong with the team, what's wrong with the problem, and really address it head on, as opposed to just sort of let them figure it out on their own. And I mean, obviously you've got to go in and change things. This was a tough year, and he's got to be willing to change, and he's got to be humble enough to realize his own failings and try and fill the gaps and figure it out.
What's a change? I mean, what might be one change you look at this year that you would have liked to see done differently?
Maybe alter the offense to fit, more the personnel a little bit. It seemed like we were trying to run last year's offense with this team, with Vonleh being Cody Zeller, and Vonleh's a completely different player than Cody Zeller. He's more of a perimeter-oriented, big guy. He's more of a catch it at the top of the key and drive it and we started to figure that out towards the end of the year. But he's not a back to the basket guy who's just going to catch it and score like Cody was. I also think that maybe trying to fit guys into boxes doesn't work. I mean, Will did not take the Victor Oladipo role. He's a different guy. A lot of people, even fans, expected that to sort of be an easy transition, but they're just different players. And I think also you've got to look at turnovers. What is the reason for them? Why is this team having so many problems with it? Why has this been an issue? Is it because we play too fast? Is it because we don't take advantage of the right sets in our offense and we're late with passes and things like that? So I just think it's a whole program thing. You've got to take a look at the issues with the program. Luckily, it doesn't. I mean, other than the Hunter arrest this year, we haven't had off the court problems. So it's not like you have to fix that stuff. Or it seems like everybody does well in the classroom. It's more about the on-court performance, and I think those are the easiest things to solve because you just got to watch tape, figure out what's going on. The problem is you've got to look at yourself and your program, and it's hard to let go of certain things or change certain things when that's what you've done. I mean, it's your baby, but if you want to be successful, you sometimes have to alter your approach and the way you do things.
All right, and Zach, I mean, do you view now next year as kind of a show me year for Tom Crean? I mean, like you said, you've supported him, but on how solid is that support, I guess, as we go into next year?
I mean, I would say I have a solid support for him, but don't get me wrong. There's definitely pause when I say that, and definitely I think next year is a show me year, and if say things go as bad as they did this year or almost as bad as they did this year, then the athletic department's definitely going to have to evaluate his stance with the program. But nonetheless, I mean, I think if it gets better, and I think if the team gets to the tournament, and I think if Crean gets the best out of his players more so than he did this year, then I think he'll be all right, and I think he'll be in a more comfortable position than whether maybe he is now or we view him to be at this point. And I just wanted to touch on what Ryan said real quick. I think I pretty much agree. There just wasn't enough adjustments from the year before, and he probably just got a little bit too complacent with basically what worked with the unit he was working with before, for multiple years, 4 years in many of those players' cases. And I think he just didn't adjust enough. I think, like Ryan said, he didn't adjust player to player. He didn't adjust game to game like he should have, and kind of just tried to go off what worked before. And that just didn't work out. I think he had to ask for too much down the stretch, obviously, from Yogi, from Will, and from some of the others in certain games here and there. And I think as long as he can adjust and as long as he gets to know the players in their games and how to utilize them better going forward, I really do think that next year won't be as big of a catastrophe as was this year. But if it is, or if it's anywhere close, then my support for Crean is going to be very thin, and I'll probably be sounding more like some of the guys in the other podcasts, to be honest.
Well, and Andy, I want to bring you in here now, and kind of speaking of the guys on the other podcast, Andy, I feel like sometimes on this show you daydream about being on Crimson Cast while we all sit here holding hands singing Crean Baya, because I know that things that Tom Crean does frustrate you, and you've written about these on the subscriber-only emails, which people can sign up for at assemblycall.com/subscribe, with the substitution patterns, with some of the adjustments out of the second half. So, I want to get your candid assessment, both of Tom Crean's job this year and just kind of your feelings of him overall, and then what some of your findings were. I mean, as you analyze game by game, substitutions have been a big criticism of Tom Crean, and I think, to me at least, I think we saw some of that get a little bit better as the season went along. It just felt like it took too long, again, for that adjustment to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the second part of that first. I mean, I was just going through. I realized I have not even watched the Illinois game. I was at work when it happened, and I really had no desire to watch it, so I will not, and nor have I done analysis on it. But I will say that I kind of updated the spreadsheet that I've kept all this stuff in over the course of the season, and so through the 18 Big Ten games, the team played 154 different combinations of players, which I will admit that I don't have anything to benchmark that against in terms of what Crean's done, what IU has done, what other coaches do, any of that. But on the surface, that seems a little crazy. And you look at just the number of times that these groups were used, of those, and this could be used multiple times within the game. So of those 154, the number that was used that played together during more than 8 individual stints of play was 8. I mean, to me, particularly with the young team, when we think about what went wrong this year and how did that all go, I mean, it's hard not to look at something like that and feel like some more cohesion could have done this team well. And we did see some of those changes at points during the season or during halves, but then the very next game it seemed like it reverted back to how it was. And I'm not 100% sure that this updated correctly, but if this is right, if anything, it's too low. Yogi played with 113 different combinations of players of those 154. I mean, that's a lot to put on one guy to say, look, you probably have no idea who's going to be out here on the court with you at any given moment, but here you go. See if you can figure this out. And I think, he was obviously asked to do a great deal for the team this season. I think, as you and Zach pointed out, was a huge positive as we look at this season and how he developed. And I think some of what he did even becomes more impressive when you think about the revolving door that he was out there with. From an efficiency standpoint, he had the best one on the team, and I think that's a lot of a testament to what he was able to do. So that was a positive I didn't really get to because I felt like you had covered it, but I think some of his accomplishments look that much better through the lens of all the different guys that he had to play with. In terms of general thoughts about Crean, I think that what strikes me lately is what appears to be a complete lack of self-awareness. The Twitter stuff is one thing. I mean, you kind of go back. I was, writing some of this down today. The Sweet 16 rings about how that might be perceived. Cutting down the nets after the loss. The special banner for the Big Ten championship team. The Jeff Meyer thing last year where he's confronting him after the game. And then the comments on Twitter this week. And part of it is, I'm sure those guys did want to play in the NIT, and I'm sure that's what it was about. But you set yourself up. Some of these other things have really set him up for that kind of criticism, not just from IU's fan base, but, you kind of look on, Twitter's, it's a barometer of something. But a ton of, different sports writers and whatever went after him, after he said this, we want to keep playing. All right, then why aren't you playing in the CBI? I 100% agree that playing in the CBI was not the right thing to do for IU. It's a no-win situation. If you win, you should win. If you lose, you're going to get mocked, and all the other stuff is going to get thrown back in your face. But you have that. You have the Twitter thing yesterday. Like, I don't read my Twitter. There's no way that that's actually true. And it actually just makes it worse. I love the fact that he wants to tweet out thoughts about the season, and I think that's great. But part of what makes Twitter interesting is the two-way conversation, even when people don't agree with you. And I'm not suggesting that he engage in a debate with me or anybody else as to why he played certain lineups, his philosophy on coaching. The reality is he knows more about coaching basketball than I do. He knows more about that than I ever will. He knows more about that than all of us. He's not an idiot, but some of the things that he's doing are really not positioning him well with members of the fan base. I think to a certain extent with potential recruits where, there was one today about, guys kind of, I favorited it so I could look back at it tonight. But, the players that thrive on competition always get better and make you win. The players that avoid competition hold everyone else back. Well, that's a great sentiment, but you can't help but feel like that's directed at somebody who's on the team right now. And I think in that position with a program like this, you have to understand the microscope that those things get put under. And I think the way he's handled some of these situations would suggest that he either A, doesn't give a damn about any of it, or B, is completely clueless, or C, on the brink of coming unhinged at some point. And I'm not sure any of those is good. So that's kind of where I come from with, the coaching philosophy, whatever you want to call it. I think you can point to a lot of things that would suggest in some ways, has he been any different than a Tony Bennett, where I know, Ryan kind of said something on Twitter over the weekend where he kind of caught lightning in a bottle, and I'm not going to run a campaign to get Tony Bennett to be the IU coach, but it isn't all that much different than Crean. He had a pretty special scenario these last couple of years with these guys, and those guys leave, and then you kind of see what this season turns into. So I do think there's reason to be concerned. It's valid to criticize. It's also valid to, appreciate what he's done. But there's no question in that another season like this, or even another one close to this, I would have to imagine ends up being his last.
So what you're saying is the C on your hat is not for Crean.
It totally is. I'm really trying to rally support. I'm going to get shirts made up too, so yeah.
You're sending mixed messages, Andy.
Hey, one advantage to playing in the CBI is that it would have improved our strength of schedule.
It most definitely would have.
Which is a transition into our next topic, which is the schedule. We've, I think pretty much every show that talks about Indiana has talked about the schedule a lot this year. We knew at the beginning it's been bad. Crimson Cast tweeted out some great stuff earlier today that basically, going back to his Marquette days, to quote Galen, Crean schedules like a pansy. And in a certain extent, to a certain extent, that's true. The rankings are almost always in the 200s. Talking about non-conference strength of schedule here, obviously the one that you can control. And it seemed, and obviously that really hurt Indiana. You got to 17 wins. The big wins were at home. There was really nothing else to speak of. And I realized there's always extenuating circumstances. I live in Dallas, and I heard Larry Brown, on the radio this morning talking about how, well, when we played Wyoming, they were this, and we thought, Rhode Island was going to be this, and yeah, that happens. The problem is you have no margin for error when 7, 8 of the teams that you schedule are, 250 or below. I don't know the exact numbers on ours. I just know that a lot of the teams were really bad. And as I talked with Zach Osterman about on Podcast on the Brink, it's not just about improving the top-level teams. It's not just about getting a game with Louisville. It's about playing a team from the MAC instead of, North Carolina Central State West or whatever. And so, whether that part of it is going to improve, we don't know. There's been a lot of lip service paid to the schedule, I think, and it will be better next year because we play Louisville, and SMU is coming to Bloomington. And so there are a few more higher-profile games that look like it'll make it better. And I know you can't do everything in 1 year because there's contracts signed, but I think we're going to really be able to see here over these next couple years who's in charge of things. I don't remember who made that point. It may have been Crimson Cast. It may have been somebody else. But, if Crean has his druthers, history would show that he's going to keep scheduling that way. And we'll see if maybe this changes, then maybe Fred Glass has a bit more of an imprint on it. So I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because it's going to be a big issue heading into next year, and it'll kind of allow us to transition out of talking about this past year. I put in our chat, what other topics do you guys want? And Ryan said, it feels like we've talked about the same things every single show, not sure what else there is. And I'm sure we'll reflect on some guys like Troy Williams when we talk about the future, but I do want to move forward. And so let's start with the schedule talk. And Ryan, feel free to jump in on that first if you want to.
Yeah, I think that coaches get blamed for the schedule all the time, and they do have say in it. The athletic department makes the schedules, though. They're the ones who have to work, as you were saying, they have to work out contracts with schools. They have to work out travel. They have to work – any major school is going to want to play those games at home. And so that's why you see teams play lower-ranked teams because they're willing to travel. LIU Brooklyn, traditionally a decent team, not great at all. Stony Brook, usually really good. I think they had 23 wins this year. Oakland usually is a competitive team. Okay, these teams all wound up being pretty bad this year, except for Stony Brook. And I think that we also had Notre Dame on the schedule. They ended up being a dud. We lost anyway, so it didn't really matter. I think it's one of those things where, yeah, the schedule does need to get better. Nobody will deny that. But at the same time, it's not all on the coach. I think that when he was at Marquette, it's harder to get teams to travel up to Milwaukee. I think that Indiana, everyone wants to play there, so they should have their pick. But it's a matter of signing contracts. It's a matter of a lot of, like, a MAC team will probably ask you to do a home and home, which we're not going to want to do for a preseason game. So yeah, it's a matter of targeting the right schools and bringing them in. But it's also you have to realize that everybody else is trying to do that too, to get teams that aren't great but aren't, complete walkover bottom 250 teams. So, it's a really tough thing to do, but at the same time, we can all agree, yeah, they need to schedule tougher teams. There's no question about it. You need to at least sprinkle in a top 25 team, a traditional top 25 team or so in there, just to raise it up a little bit. Because
but back up for a second. So what's so wrong with doing a home and home with a MAC school? Like, why is that off the table? I mean, is this the We're Indiana answer? Because to me, it seems like
no.
Because to me, it seems
one word, money. Because they don't want to have a road game at somebody else's school during. That's the reason why. It's an athletic department thing.
Okay,
if they can sell 18,000 tickets, they're going to sell 18,000 tickets and have it at home.
Fine,
yeah, it hurts.
Isn't that maybe short-sighted?
Absolutely, it is.
Okay.
Absolutely, it is. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'd be fine if we did a home and home with Dayton, but the athletic department wants their job is to make as much money as possible for the school, and that's what they're going to do. Look at I would say 90% of the top 40 teams didn't have a true road game. Maybe had one true road game, I'll say, or two true road games in the preseason. Yeah, we should do that, but with our arena and how much money each game makes, I have a real tough time seeing them do that.
All right, so Andy, you study this stuff. I mean, you see all the schedules. I don't really know how to compare Indiana's to what other big schools are doing, just kind of outside of what I hear. So, I mean, how bad is what Indiana's non-conference schedule was this year and in the past in comparison to what other teams, other bigger programs are doing?
I mean, the one thing I said when we were exchanging a few emails earlier this week was, they need to get whoever the Southern Miss AD or whatever is in, because they always end up with a really high RPI, but they still manage to not really play anybody, but to a point where they're in the conversation. And I think, to me, it isn't. I think a lot of attention gets put on who are your marquee games, and those are great. I mean, a team like IU is going to have some number of marquee games pretty much regardless of what they want to do. They're going to be in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. They're going to get invited to some kind of tournament or off-court thing. You're going to have opportunities to get those. It's what you do with the rest of the games that matters to me. I think it's I even remember a few years ago, they played at Evansville to kind of open their arena. It was a good test. It was a game you didn't feel like you should lose, and that's where I kind of agree with you on some of the MAC stuff. But I mean, the reality is, so we can say that we don't think that these teams will come, but let's just look at teams. I'm just going to read off some teams that are right around 150 in the RPI or 150 or lower, that clearly would want to be a part of playing IU and are teams that IU should be able to beat. I realize that. In particular this year's team, maybe you want to do a little bit more to be able to beef up your win total, give guys some confidence or whatever, but that can't be the bulk of it. So you've got teams like Wofford, San Diego, Northwestern State, Pepperdine, Wright State, Miami of Ohio, Elon, South Carolina Upstate, who they've played in the past, Bucknell, Stony Brook, who they've played, High Point, Southern, Old Dominion, Winthrop. Like, IU has the talent to beat those teams, and those are substantially better than than most of the teams they play in the non-conference this year. And even those kinds of minor tweaks have a big impact on it. And I agree that it's not easy to predict necessarily who's going to be good. Some of these teams might have down years, but it's not that hard either. I mean, I looked at what I went back through, and granted, I did this closer to the start of the season and just kind of picked winners of some of these smaller leagues. And more often than not, one of the team I picked was right there in the conference tournament. I'm sorry, Kennesaw State. Kennesaw State is going to be absolute crap. Nicholls State is going to be awful.
Hey, Andy, I'm sorry to step in on what you're saying. How far in advance?
I'm sorry. I know you have Kennesaw State ties. I did not.
No.
No disrespect, clearly.
No, you're absolutely correct on Kennesaw State. I'm not going to come over there and kick your ass for that comment. No, I was wondering how far in advance do they have to set these things though? Is it a year out, or can they do it the spring beforehand?
For me, it has to be the spring beforehand, or else they'd already know. I mean, they don't. I guess I don't know. They typically don't release it till later, but I think there's some flexibility, or else I would assume we'd know more about next year's schedule than we do, where there's really the only things known at this point, at least as far as I can tell. I'm looking at the Inside the Hall thing. They've got that SMU game that really got leaked almost by Larry Brown, the Louisville game in the Jimmy V, and then Butler, who you knew they were going to play in the Crossroads Classic. So I think there's some flexibility there, because I do think some people wait to figure out what kind of team they're going to have and try to fill some of those spots. So I do think to a certain extent you can make educated guesses on a lot of these teams and try to get teams that are in the 150 upper, or upper end of the 100s in the RPI and not really kill yourself. And you're not going to be right on all of them, but if you try to schedule 8 of those games, you're probably going to be pretty close on 5 or 6 of them. And if the other few end up being like low 250s, then so be it. But I think when you start out that way, it's a pretty big difference because in looking through some of the stuff this year, I think a team like Arizona, they might have only played 4 sub 100 teams or sub 200 teams toward the end. Kansas played a just absurdly tough schedule, which would not have been wise for IU this year. But I do think most major conference teams kind of limit. They're going to have a couple of those teams that they know they're just going to pound. But I also think there's some, we want to get decent teams from other leagues who are going to rack up wins because part of the RPI works on who the teams you beat can beat. So if you are able to pick a team that's going to win 12 games, even in a lesser conference, it's a huge benefit for what you end up being. So I hope to see some changes there for this year. I do think it is fair to put some of that on the AD. The thing I would say is that it probably isn't a coincidence at some point that Crean's had this pretty much anywhere he's been in his last 2 stops. And by the same token, I think Marquette, while they might not be able to get the same kinds of teams that IU could get, there's still teams that are going to be willing to go there. That are these middle tier teams, even if for no other reason than to try to prove they can beat some of these guys.
All right, and real quick, and then we'll move on. Zach put a good question in the chat. So, like this year, right, we had Syracuse, Connecticut, Notre Dame. Those are some high-profile teams. Yes, how much better does it have to be? And Andy, can you just address this from a math perspective? You kind of hinted at it there with the RPI, but it's all about those lower teams just pulling your ranking down so much, and because that's such an important discussion point within the committee room, you've got to do some things to, I guess, raise the floor, right, on your with the math.
Yeah, I mean, I think from I'm not gonna sit here and claim to know how all of it works, but it's very much based on who, road wins are huge, and your opponents, who they beat is also big, and how many games they won. So if you're able to schedule even winnable road games, 1 or 2, you don't have to schedule a lot in the non-conference. Those go a long way, and then scheduling some of these teams that are even just in the 100s, or even in the lower end of the double digits, teams are in the 90s or whatever, you'll hear people throw out, oh, they have this many top 100 wins. Well, sometimes people throw that out, and you'll look, and it's like, okay, well, 5 of those came against the, outside of the top, between 85 and 100, which I think is kind of where Ohio State ended up being this year. So I think you can do some things there and still feel comfortable that you're going to win those games. That's the other fear that I think we didn't talk a lot about is, like, I don't want the embarrassment of losing to somebody, but I guess I would argue if you balance that against the embarrassment of not getting into even the NIT, then maybe it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, well, maybe with a young team like this, if you lose one of those games early, it humbles you a little bit, and perhaps some of the growth that we saw later in the season, we see a little bit earlier. Who knows? I mean, that's all theoretical, hypothetical. But with that said, let's start looking forward. Okay, this season was, in a lot of ways, a disaster. It was certainly disappointing. And really, Andy, you mentioned this earlier. You can kind of look at next year in a lot of different ways. To me, when I look at it, I see, when I look at the roster, there's not a senior on there. I mean, Austin Etherington is a redshirt junior. So we're basically going to have this roster for the next 2 years, and give these guys a chance to really step into roles, learn to play with each other. And I talk about this in the article, that one of the most interesting things that Zach Osterman and I discussed on that podcast on the Brink was how disjointed Indiana's summer was before this year. And whereas this team had done a lot together in the summers previous, this year you had Will and Yogi off playing for Team USA and Noah in and out at skills camps, and so you had these young guys kind of on campus by themselves, and there just wasn't a whole lot of ability during the offseason to get as much continuity as there had been. Now, did that affect the team into the season? None of us can know just from, analyzing and watching games. I just know that from what I saw, it's certainly an explanation that makes sense to a certain degree. And so I think now when you look forward, perhaps some of those issues that plagued this year's team and prevented them from living up to their potential, specifically that disjointedness and the lack of communication, just lack of cohesion, perhaps more of that, and more of guys understanding their roles from the get-go can compensate for less talent. Because obviously they're going to be less talented when you lose a guy like Noah Vonleh. He was disappointing late in the year, but let's not forget this is the most dominating rebounder we've seen in an IU uniform since probably DJ White's senior year, and from a freshman perspective, not since probably Allen Henderson. And, so losing Noah was going to hurt, but I think there's a chance with guys, in roles, with Yogi able to fully take the reins of the leadership, that perhaps things can get better. And so I want to break that apart and get everybody's thoughts on that. But the first place that I want to go to is with the recruits. And Ryan, I want to bring you in on this because I know you've done some extensive studying of these guys, and Indiana fans somewhat sound like Cubs fans some now. Hey, wait till next year. We got James Blackman Jr., we got Robert Johnson, but we don't really know what these guys are going to be able to bring, because sometimes recruits worked out, sometimes they don't. There's a time when we were all very excited for Jeremy Hollowell, and the light hasn't ever turned on for him yet. So, obviously Indiana is going to be a team dominated by its backcourt next year, so we need these guys to step up, especially as shooters. Ryan, give me about a minute on each guy, and what you think they're going to be able to bring to the table as soon as next season, and what they project to be over their careers.
Well, I'll start with Blackman just because he's the big name. He's the McDonald's All-American. He's a legit 6'3". He's listed as 6'4". There's no way he's 6'4". He's about 6'3". He could start in the Big Ten right now. He's an elite shooter. I mean, just as soon as he crosses half court, he's in range. The guy can just absolutely fill it up from the outside. As far as his driving goes, he's a guy who can finish at the rim. He really falls in love with his floater every now and then, sort of a mid paint floater. But I think that he's going to need to work on finishing at the rim, just because it's going to be a big part of his game, because people are going to overplay him to shoot. He's got okay vision. I think it's getting better, but he's a guy who has the ball in his hand a lot. And so he's going to have to – he's great coming off of screens, and he's great curling within the offense, getting open, popping as soon as he catches the ball. But he's also going to need to continue to improve there, because he's going to have to play off the ball somewhat in college. Now it's pretty much his team in high school. He has decent athleticism. He's not elite, though. He's not a guy who's going to jump over 10 guys and dunk and do anything crazy with that. So that's really the only downside in his game that I see, is he's just not one of those high-level, crazy athletes. But with his game, he doesn't really need to be. I think that he's just one of those guys who's going to – he can also – the thing about his shot is he can hit it from anywhere. He can pull up. He can just catch it off a screen. He can get a kick out anywhere. He is dangerous with that shot, and he's also under control all the time, and he's very composed. So that's a big deal. He's mature with the ball, mature as a basketball player coming in next year. So that's really solid.
How is he defensively, specifically on the ball?
It's hard to tell, because most of the video I have of him is AAU ball. I think he's a solid defender. His footwork is good. He plays off the ball pretty well. I think he's going to gamble a lot as a freshman, because I think that's what he's used to. When you're on a one-man team, you're always going for steals. You're doing stuff like that. I think that he's going to need to dial that back. He's not there yet. As far as a defender, being able, he couldn't step in and guard Gary Harris right now and perform well, I don't think. I think he could do all right. But again, that's something he's going to have to work on, just going up against guys like Yogi every single day. And I think that he will develop. He has the tools to be better defensively. He's just not there yet, because, let's face it, every time he steps on the floor, he's the best guy on the floor. So you really need to be challenged to become a better defender.
Okay, let's talk about Robert Johnson. And we can get into Max Hetzel if you want. I think we can probably limit him, just because he's probably not a guy who will contribute until his junior, maybe sophomore, junior year. Unless you have some hot opinions on him and you think he's better than that.
We'll get there in a minute. Robert Johnson's a combo guard. He's listed as a combo guard. Some people think he can play point. I don't think so. I think he's a scoring guard. He's a great penetrator. Again, pure scorer. He can shoot it. His shot isn't perfect, but it goes in. He's a shot maker, not a pure shooter, which means that he likes to get into the paint, pull up, do whatever. He gets the ball. So the difference for me between a shooter and a shot maker is a shooter is a guy who hits nothing but net. A shot maker is a guy who puts the ball on the inside of the rim and it goes in. And I think that the thing about Johnson that really stands out is he has a ton of confidence. He gets the ball and he just wants to go, and he's going to beat you. And he's a guy that really blew up last spring and summer. He was sort of known nationally, but he wasn't a marquee guy, and really blew up because he went to a couple camps and all of a sudden he was finishing at the rim with both hands. And before that he had just been a shooter. And so he's got a gorgeous crossover that Indiana fans are going to love. the question for him also is same with Blackman is how is he going to play away from the ball, because obviously Yogi's the point guard. I think he can run some with the ball. He's not a pure point guard. He's not going to be dishing out assists or anything like that. So it's going to be how does he play away from the ball? How does he come off screens? How does he deal with not having it in his hands at all times? Again, one of my favorite things about him is just his confidence, though. He's a very as far as his defender, as a defender, he's very aggressive, and he also plays with kind of like an edge to him, kind of a swagger, and I really like that about him. And he's listed at 6'3". I don't think he's bigger than 6'2", maybe 6'1". But he's well built already. He's not tall and lanky. He doesn't have to grow into his body. He's pretty solid, and he's, I think, a guy that's going to surprise people. And he'll be coming off the bench next year, but I think he could do some things in the way Stan Robinson did this year.
Okay, and finally, Max Hetzel.
Max is an interesting case because he was completely off the radar until last spring. I mean, the people who liked him loved him, but he hadn't really broken out. He's from Calabasas, California, which is not a basketball hotbed. It's outside of LA. It's really just a lot. It's a very it's an upper middle class neighborhood that's probably more of a baseball area. And he blew up, and people really liked him. He has a gorgeous release on his shot. It is picture perfect. The problem with him is that I saw with his shot, because he's going to be a shooter. That's what he's coming in for. He's 6'7", could be 6'8", real lanky. And a lot of his movements are kind of looping movements. They're not really tight, and I think that's going to come when he fills out. But on his release on his shot, he over-rotates his body a little bit. So you get that with some guys where when they finish their shot, they're not square to the basket, they're turned a little bit. And so I think he needs to fix that. He kicks his leg out on his shot a little bit, which I don't like, but his shot goes in. And being that tall and being able to hit pretty much from 25 feet in is really nice. He needs to add strength. He needs to grow into his body. And he needs to become a better rebounder for his size. He's the kind of guy who off a rebound will let it come to him instead of going up and getting it. And that needs to change. And his lateral quickness needs to get better defensively. Other than that, he likes to handle the ball, and he likes to try and drive and stuff. I don't think that's going to work in the Big Ten. He's going to have to get much stronger and much tighter with the ball. And he's going to have to. His movements are just going to have to be more compact because he's just kind of a loopy, lanky guy. He's going to need to tighten that up. But he's a guy with a really high upside. I think he could be sort of a Steve Novak type in the future for us.
Okay, so. And Brian, great insight on those guys. That I think that gives us some knowledge about what we have coming in. Now, obviously, we have to see if that translates to the college game, and there's an adjustment period for everybody. We'll see how long it is for these guys. Andy, you mentioned earlier, we're kind of talking about next year, and you said you could kind of be persuaded either way about how good we're going to be that will be next year. So let me real quick give some optimism for next year, and then feel free to agree with what I say or provide some of the balance to that. I look at next year and I see kind of the reverse of this year, right? Where this was a team this year that was more defensive oriented, obviously had a big post presence, really dominated on the glass. And next year we're going to be much more perimeter oriented. We're going to be able to shoot. That big issue this year shouldn't theoretically be there with James Blackman there and with Robert Johnson hopefully being able to knock down some shots. And that should really help Yogi have some space to operate. It should help Troy Williams, I think, operate offensively, and we really saw improvement from him, understanding his role in the offense. He was 19 of 26 over his last 3 games. Now the problem, of course, is going to be a post presence. A big X factor next year is Hunter Perea. He's shown some flashes on defense of being able to contribute, and he obviously has an improved, shot from the free throw line and was able to get a few alley-oops, but otherwise doesn't really have a go-to move. Devin Davis hasn't shown much beyond being kind of a garbage man. But I think you look this year, and when Indiana really tried to force the ball inside, they weren't always successful. And there were times when Noah Vonleh was down there clogging up the lane, and the offense really seemed to get bogged down. And the team seemed to do better when it was a bit more freewheeling and the floor was a bit more spread and guys were able to drive more. And I think the ability to spread the floor and the lack of that true postman may open up the offense some to where this team can get back up to the offensive efficiency that we've been used to the previous 2 years, not this year. And again, kind of flip that to where it's a team that's more reliant on scoring than they are defense. But I think that should help us win some of those games this year that we lost, like against a Penn State, against a Northwestern, because those are teams that if you can outscore, you're going to beat them. And this year we just struggled so much scoring that they were able to drag us down to their level, and then, unable to execute at the end, we lost those games. And so I think, with the strength going back to the offensive side of the ball, I would think, and going back to, being able to make shots and go on scoring bursts that we weren't able to this year, we can get back to playing more of the ball that we've seen Crean be successful with. And also next year we're going to be an underdog again, and I think Crean has functioned better as an underdog. Now, if expectations get raised with a solid performance next year, we'll have to see, if they get raised again for the 2015-16 season, how we do. But again, we're going to focus on next year and hope that it's good enough to raise expectations. But I just think it seems to me the roster composition, you take out the center, but it's more balanced otherwise, and it just seems to fit what this staff wants to do, especially offensively, and that combined with hopefully more continuity, more togetherness, all those things, I think can very well be the difference between 4, 5, 6 victories, because that so often was what I thought dragged us down this year. So that's my kind of, my platform of optimism for next year for Indiana. Andy, feel free to address any of that. Zach, I want to get your thoughts too on the front court situation, but Andy, let's go to you first.
I know. So now it's my time to throw cold water on everything, right?
No, you can agree with me.
No, that's fine. No, I know how it goes. I heard what you guys said about me this year that I wasn't on, so it's fine. No, I get it. No, I'm just joking. I do think it'll be interesting because I tried to look back and it reminded me. I tried to see how much I thought it would be like some of Crean's teams at Marquette, who had a lot of different wing players and played more of a guard-oriented offense, and look back a little bit at some of those teams, because the trio that I was thinking of when I started thinking about IU playing 3 guards was when he had Dominic James and Jarrell McNeil and Wesley Matthews, who ended up going, and I think is still in the NBA, although I'll admit I rarely watch the NBA. So, I started to think about how they compared to those guys. I think the big difference for me is, well, there's probably a couple. One is Matthews was like a 6'5", 6'6" guy who could definitely rebound well for his position, and I think when you look at any combination of the 3 guys that are likely to be in the backcourt, are all going to be 6'3" or less. Like Ryan said, we can list people at whatever they want, but there's no way in the world that Johnson, Stan Robinson, or Blackman are over 6'3". So you're going to be playing 3 guys that way, and I think that's a little bit of a difference. Now the difference on the positive side is that you have, with Blackman, at least it would seem to be a better outside shooter than any of those 3 were for the Marquette team. So, just in trying to, kind of figure out how he might use those guys, that was at least what I figured out, or the best comparison that I can make to at least what I thought back to when I thought to some of those teams. The other thing, though, is, you look at some of those, and they had a guy like Lazar Hayward who could step out and hit threes and was kind of a rough and tumble guy inside, even though he wasn't all that big. So you got to figure out who fits some of those roles. And then they just kind of played, they had just a guy at center. It didn't matter who it was. They had a few different guys rotate in there, and it was kind of a just come in, don't screw anything up. You're probably not going to get shots. Just rebound, play defense, and do whatever. And so maybe that's a role that Perea is best suited for at this point. So it almost puts a lot of attention on whoever ends up playing the 4, if you assume Perea is going to start at center, and how well they can really rebound and develop. And so I think that puts a lot of pressure on a guy like Troy Williams. I think he's the one that almost has to step into that role. So for me, I think that's what will be interesting to see and how they do that. I do think rebounding and interior play and just physical play in general, I think, is going to be a challenge for IU against bigger teams. I think it's going to make it more important that they're able to hit outside shots, and more important that they're going to be able to get out in transition where they can, try to score and use some of their quickness to offset what's probably going to be a size and height disadvantage in most games.
Yeah, I mean, and there really is kind of an embarrassment of riches in the backcourt, it would seem, with Yogi and with James Blackman and with Troy Williams, if you consider him a backcourt guy, and Stan and Robert Johnson. I mean, there's a lot of options there. The options obviously get thinner in the front court. Zach, I want to bring you in and talk about this. Obviously, Luke Fisher left in the middle of the season, and that's going to be felt a lot more now as we move into this year. And we can't, assume that Lee from Temple is going to come, although that brought people a lot of excitement today. If he does, we'll have another episode of the Assembly Call, and we'll break down what that means. But when you look at the roster right now, you're relying on Hunter Perea, Devin Davis, Austin Etherington as kind of your front court guys. And I know when I was projecting forward, I looked at it as you put Troy at the small forward, you have to kind of assume that Crean's going to go seniority and give Etherington that first shot to start. And so maybe then, Davis, because of the growth he showed and just his effort and hopefully consistency, maybe he gets that center role. And the ideal is for Perea to grab it, take it, hold on to it, because that's what we need to happen. But obviously, trusting he and Jeremy Hollowell to do anything at this point has been tough. So how do you see that shaking out with those guys in the front court next year?
Yeah, well, like Andy said, I think that it's definitely fair to say that against the biggest of teams, we'll struggle in the post, rebounding and defending. But I really do think we'll be able to mask it at least a little bit against most teams. Troy Williams is a pretty natural rebounder. I forget what his average was this year. Should have pulled it up. But, he could grab himself a fair amount of rebounds pretty much every time out. Devin Davis, I think, he's just such a scrapper. He'll, with the more minutes he gets, getting into more of the flow of the game than he was able to more than just a couple times this year. I think he can be a pretty natural rebounder. And obviously Hunter Perea with that long wingspan. And if these guys can develop, if maybe one of them can take a big step forward, a couple of them get, a little bit better, I think we can definitely mask the rebounding issues. As far as offensive production goes down low, obviously that will remain to be seen. You can't be feeling too good about it if we don't get a proven option in there for the post, like the guy from Temple or somebody else that might pop up soon. But I think we'll be able to mask it. Like I said, hopefully one of those guys can take a big step forward. If the other guys can just progress, as much as one should from one year to the next, from freshman year to sophomore year, in a couple of those guys' cases, then I think we'll be all right. And like I said, against the bigger teams, rebounding will definitely be an issue. But I definitely think we'll be able to hold our own against more teams than not, even in Big Ten play. And like you guys were saying, with the backcourt that really could be lethal, if we can score and keep the rebounding margin pretty even or close to even against some of the better teams, I think we'll be right in a lot of games.
Yeah, and again, when I say optimism for next year, I certainly don't think that this is, necessarily a preseason top 25 team or a top, 4 or 5 team in the Big Ten. I think and that's the reason why this season was a step back, because now I think for next year, you kind of go back with the expectations that you had for this year, where you're hoping for 20, 21, 22 victories maybe if things fall right, and you're on the NCAA tournament bubble, or maybe you're an 8-9 seed, something like that. I think the team is fully capable of doing that. Then hopefully they can make that leap that next year where now there's seniors, and they've played together for an entire year and they're in those same roles and you add a piece here or there. Now you can really make that jump, somewhat similar to how, those teams progressed with Oladipo and Zeller in that sense. Ryan, let me talk to you. You mentioned that in our chat, it's kind of the elephant in the room. We're just talking like Vonleh is going to be gone, and I think that's the fair assumption at this point. It certainly seems like I would be pretty shocked right now if he comes back. You may feel differently about it, but I want to get your thoughts on that, and also just I don't want to say it's like Ewing theory by any means, but is there Noah helped a ton on defense, a ton on from a rebounding perspective, and had games where he flashed that ability on offense to take games over. But again, there were a lot of moments where he seemed out of place. The team seemed unable to use him, and he's not the big gazelle type runner like Zeller is that would seem to function better in Crean's offense. It just seems like a Crean offense doesn't necessarily know how to incorporate a post-up center, and they tried to face Vonleh up some later in the year, and maybe the foot injury, capped the potential for that, and so maybe they would do some more of that next year. But give me your thoughts just on A, if you've changed your mind at all yet that Noah's actually going to leave, and B, how big of a loss it is. Maybe I'm underplaying it, and you can set me straight.
No, let me first just say that since day one when Noah signed up to play at IU, I have heard that he bought into a 2-year program. That was what he bought into. That was the whole. That doesn't mean he can't change his mind, and that doesn't mean that his family, I'm sure, is hearing from agents and scouts and everyone saying, "Hey, he's going to be a lottery pick. He's got to go." So that's going to have a huge impact. I had heard all season, pretty much all season, he was coming back. He knew he had work to do. He had promised that he was going to do a 2-year thing. That's why Crane made that statement that people now are picking apart, saying he wanted guys who would unpack their suitcase. Well, Noah unpacked his suitcase. He said he was staying. He certainly looks like he's going to be. I think he's going to be outside the top 10. I think he's maybe the 10th pick, 10 or 12, 10 to 12 is where I think he'll go. I think that people who like him now will break down his game tape and downgrade him a little bit because we know he's not there offensively. I think he'll spend time in the D League next year. I don't think he's ready offensively, but the NBA drafts on potential, so you'll see him get drafted certainly high. Right now, we're hearing reports that he's leaning towards leaving, and you have to take those at face value because they're coming from a guy like Adrian Wojnarowski who doesn't just make stuff up. So, yeah, I would think that right now that's probably where he's leaning, but it's not over yet. This staff, I guarantee you, is recruiting him right now to come back, and this is a heck of a recruiting staff. Remember, we also were told that, we were told that Christian Watford was likely gone because he had maxed out here. We were told that Cody Zeller was leaving after his freshman year, so you never know. I'm not saying that means Vonleh's coming back, but you just never know until the announcement's made which way it's going to go. As for how important he is, you're right, Jerod. I think that at times he did slow the offense down, but again, when you look at what he provided on the glass and defensively, even if he wasn't doing anything defensively, the fact that you have a 6'10" guy back there, who can block a shot, it really changes what an offense can do against your defense. I think that he would be better. I think he obviously needs more post moves. I've been saying all year he has a half a post move because he has one post move and it ain't that great. It's that little driving jump hook, towards the middle of the lane, and he did the same thing every time. It was a 2-dribble, over the shoulder jump hook, and I think that that's another reason why he could benefit from an entire offseason, working against college level competition. But if we lose him, offensively, it's not a gigantic loss, but you're going to feel it because anytime you have a guy of that level of skill on your team, a defense has to focus on it. They can't just leave him alone. And the fact that we didn't have shooters this year, when he got doubled, he didn't have the guys to kick out to make shots. But teams, regardless of how average he was offensively this year, teams were doubling him almost every time he got the ball. And so that opens up what your offense can do. Hopefully, I've said this a lot, I said it on Twitter too, is that, Hunter Mosquera-Pereira needs to have a Victor Oladipo-like summer. He needs to come back as a different player next year with a much higher confidence, and he needs to be ready to attack and ready to actually have post moves and make things happen in the post. If he doesn't, it's going to be a long season. Even if we get somebody like Anthony Lee to transfer in, which we don't even know if that's a possibility right now. We just know that Indiana's interested. But, even with him, you're going to need somebody else to step up back there. So, yeah, we will miss Vonleh. Don't get that twisted. But I do agree with you that he wasn't, this huge key offensively that made things so much easier this year. In some ways, yeah, it did bog the offense down. But having a guy like him is important to an offense because of how much pressure it takes off everybody else.
Yeah, and I should clarify, I would welcome him back with open arms. We'd certainly be better with him. I just don't think him leaving is quite the bottom dropping out some people have made it out to be.
No, and I completely agree. I don't think it's the end-all be-all. I don't think it dramatically changes the future of the program or anything like that. But, yeah, it's a guy you want back.
Yes, and the other thing about Anthony Lee from Temple is he was retweeting a lot of fans earlier today who were, of course, begging him to go to their school as soon as the announcement was made that he was going to transfer, and an Indiana fan was one that he retweeted. So, we're on that list. We'll see where it goes from there. Let's wrap up this discussion about next year's team, and look, let's do some way too early predictions. Let's just kind of put each other on the spot here. And what do you think's going to happen next year? Just kind of get a little taste of what we think. I think this team will win 21 games next year. I think they find a way. That a few things fall right that didn't fall right this year, and just that with improved offense, hopefully we can make up for some of those issues. Let's go around the horn real quick and just give me your quick prediction on wins next year and any final thoughts on next year's team. We'll go Andy first, then Ryan, and then Zach.
Yeah, I tried to look at the schedule a little bit to try to at least get a flavor for what there was. I'm thinking maybe in the 20 win range based on what we know right now. I don't think significantly over that. based on kind of the way the Big Ten schedule shakes out, how this team's generally played on the road the last couple of years, and some of the uncertainty around what the roster is going to look like. So I would say right around that 20-win mark seems like a possibility, but I think the Vonleh leaving is magnified if they don't get somebody like Lee or whoever. I think they would need to replace him with somebody who you have a feeling of what you're going to get out of him next year. I don't think they can go in and try to go, take some big man that might be left in the class. Lee at the very least has proven to be a pretty good rebounder, at least as I've, kind of watched him play at Temple over time. How skilled he is offensively, I think, is limited inside the hall. Did something where they kind of had a shot chart for him that basically was he scores all of his points in one spot right underneath the basket, which, given for a team that couldn't convert at the rim, I guess is good. But other than that, made a few kind of foul line type jumpers, and other than that, really it isn't an immensely skilled player offensively, other than really good at rebounding, can post up if given the ball in the right spot. But I do think, before anybody gets too excited, I would say most people who are so excited about getting Anthony Lee to IU have never actually watched him play. And two, for a player who scores pretty much all of his points in the post, I'm not sure he's a great fit for a team that has been criticized for the last 3 seasons about how they can't actually get the ball to someone in the post. But that's neither here nor there. I guess we'll figure out that as it goes. But I think the one thing that I'll be interested to see next year is really what the schedule looks like and how this team responds to the pressure, and maybe more how Crean responds to the pressure, because whether he really reads Twitter or not, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to have a good season and not have anything close to a repeat of this year. And how he responds to that and how the team responds to that pressure, I think, is going to be huge. And I guess those are the couple things that I'll look for most heading into next season. I would guess between the schedule and everything else, it seems like around a 19-20 win type team. But I'll have a better feel for that, I think, once we know who's back and who's not, and what happens from there. Although I can assure you that, like any other program, everyone will have a great summer, because that's all any coach will ever say about anyone. So look forward to this headline from August. Everyone on team has great and productive summer, ready for season. So look forward to that.
Yeah, and to kind of extend your thoughts on Crean there, those expectations are going to be there whether Vonleh stays or not. They're not. I don't think the him kind of having that moving bar anymore, as Galen Clavio says, the moving goalpost. That time has really ended, and so I think those expectations are really going to be there. And you're right. We'll see how he and the team is able to respond to that. Okay, Ryan, let's get your prediction for next year's team win.
I just like to say that Andy also left out in the everyone had a great summer, that everyone's going to be in the best shape of their lives.
Yes.
Also a classic. Also,
yeah.
Except the guys hosting the post-game show.
Of course, yeah. No. Going in the other direction. My call for next year, I'm going all in on it. I'm saying 23 wins and top 4 in the Big Ten.
Whoa! Breaking news. Is that so? Are you expecting Noah to come back then, Ryan? Are you going all in with that?
I don't think it's going to matter. I think we will find someone to replace him, whether it's internally or not. I think somebody will step up and replace his, maybe not his rebounding, but I think everybody else can step up in that area. But I think that his offense can be replaced, and I think with the guys we're getting, we're going to score a lot of points. I don't think that's going to be a problem next year, just given the recruits and given the growth I expect from these guys. I'll go in with 23 wins and top 4 in the Big Ten. Sure, why not?
Okay, and we actually a comment here that came in from Hoosier Gen 96 says, talking about Robert Johnson and sharing some of your optimism. RJ has confidence. Andy has an unrelenting desire to get better. I'm so excited about him coming in. He does have swagger. He does.
I'm always right.
I will say that's something that this team lacked this year. Was some of that swagger. Even Will didn't have his normal swagger, and so getting a little bit of that back could certainly help. All right, Zach.
You know what I love? Well, I want to amend that real quick. Johnson has swagger, but it doesn't come across as like a cocky, posing after he makes a shot or anything like that. He just knows what he can do and just does it, and it's really fun to watch. And I think a lot of people are going to like him next year. Cool. I can't wait to see him play. All right, Zach. Wins. How many?
I'm going to go right at 20. When earlier you asked us in chat, over under on 20. Really struggled with that. Was thinking about 21. I'm going to stick right at 20. I think we'll sneak into the tournament. Another headline I think to look for, a couple headlines at the end of the year. I think Stan Robinson, sixth man of the year, best sixth man in college basketball. I think he will really have some high expectations heading into his junior year. And I think Yogi, as I said near the top of the show, I think he's going to pretty much answer all the questions we have for him heading into this offseason. Offensive efficiency, passing, and leadership. I think he's going to pass all those tests with ease, early on in the season, and I look for him to be one of the faces of college basketball heading into his senior year.
By the way, breaking news here, Yogi's mom just tweeted Anthony Lee, "Hey, big guy, Yogi and crew would love for you to join the IU family." So, bringing out the big guns here.
I don't want to say anything, but I think that might be tampering. Oops.
Is it?
I'm not sure. I don't know if parents can do that. I know players can, but I don't know about parents. I don't think they can.
Well, one person who's not going to realize it happened, Tom Crean, because he doesn't read Twitter, so he would not know. So hopefully the compliance department is on that one. Hey, you know what? I like the optimism here, guys. I like it. I think again, we're all trying to be realistic about next year, but at least look to what some of the positives could be. And there's the very real possibility that that things don't go there, and we realize next year that maybe we don't have the right guy for the job long term, and a lot of those things. But that'll remain to be seen. I think the lesson here is there are still a lot of reasons for optimism. And so I think as you head into the offseason, just from a fan perspective, it at least makes it the next handful of months easier to hold on to the reasons for optimism as opposed to pessimism, because there's not going to be a coaching change right now. Nothing's really changing. So if we get to the end of next year and it's like this year, we can have those conversations. But for now, I think we can all just enjoy ourselves a little bit more as fans to kind of hold on to some of that optimism, because it's there, it's real, it's not made up. There's a lot of reasons that this team could improve next year, and if they do, then certainly things look bright, I think, for 2015-16, if the man who's steering the ship can get it steered back in the right direction. Next year he needs to. Okay, before we do, just some quick final thoughts. Let's do some quick bracket tips real quick here for everybody still filling out their brackets. And again, go to assemblycall.com/bracket. You can get into our bracket challenge. If you win, you can sponsor the banner moment for the entire improved non-conference schedule. You can even get a spot on our panel. We want to involve you guys in the show next year, so get involved there. Andy, we'll start with you for the bracket tips. Give me maybe a first-round game that you're especially looking at, and your Final Four teams, and just anything else notable that you have to share after you filled out your brackets. Andy,
I'll preface this with the fact that while I have done pretty good at predicting what the field looks like the last few years, I have done a really terrible job at actually picking winners of the games. So everybody can just take this with a grain of salt. So I did this. I had a guy that I've gone on the radio with a few times in Wisconsin had me on today, so he asked me for some double-digit seeds. So I'll kind of go through each region. I gave one, although I think I gave a couple in another one. So a few double-digit seeds to look out for. Stephen F. Austin is 28 straight wins. I think they have what it takes to get past VCU. I also picked against Ohio State, maybe just out of spite. I'm not sure, but for a team that's been prone to go in the tank offensively, I think that could be a challenge. And God forbid their poor outside shooting team faces the Syracuse zone. Who knows how that might look if they do get past the first round. Going in the East, I think St. Joe's was the one that I liked. I picked them over UConn. I'm just really lashing out at anybody who beat IU over the course of the year, which is a fairly lengthy list at this point. North Dakota State, I like in the West as a double-digit seed. And then in the Midwest, either of the winners of these play-in games, which I refuse to refer to as the first round, I think could give their next opponents trouble. Manhattan was a team I liked until I saw they were playing Louisville, so that doesn't seem like that's going to work very good. So Final Four teams I had Florida. I did have Michigan State, although I was very tempted to pick Virginia. My daughter is all in on Virginia because that is her middle name after my grandma. So she is she is firmly aboard the Virginia bandwagon to win the national championship. And then I had Arizona and then Louisville coming out of the Midwest. So should be some good games, a good tournament. The games so far tonight have been pretty good and pretty competitive. So as always, a good time of the year, and I'll do my best to make the best of it, even with IU not in it.
Yeah, hey, and don't feel bad about not being able to. And by the way, Andy, congratulations again on some more great bracket predictions. I mean, every year you're right up there with some of the best who do it, and so wonderful job again. Don't feel bad about not picking the actual tournament games well, because no one does. Even if you have systems, I used to have this big statistical system I would do every year, and
I remember that, and it turned out real bad one year.
yeah, it was horrible. Now the first year it was good. And you know what's funny about the year it turned out real bad, Ryan, is I predicted the entire first session of games on Thursday, got them all right. So I'm thinking, hey, this is my year for the perfect bracket, and then it turned out to be the worst bracket I've ever had. So, but I do just want to say, my girlfriend and I are planning on throwing darts to fill out an entire bracket for her work pool, and I bet we beat all of you. So with that said, Ryan, let's go over to you, get your some bracket tips. Zach will go to you, and then we'll close this out.
My only bracket tip is something that has always held true for me pretty much the entire time I've ever been watching. I've watched the college basketball tournament. Guards win the early games, and post players win the championship. I think that to get through the first 2 weekends, you need guards. You need guards who are veterans, steady, don't turn the ball over, and can score. And then when you play in the Final Four, regional finals, stuff like that, you need easy baskets inside so you don't have to work so hard, because guys' legs wear out, shots flatten out and don't go, and when you're playing in gigantic domes like that, guys typically don't shoot as well. So easy baskets in the paint, huge deal. Doesn't have to be an All-American post player, just has to be a guy who can put the ball in the basket every once in a while when he needs to, can rebound, and play defense inside. So that's my, always look for teams like that. You're not going to get a heavy guard lineup team that shoots a ton of threes, and doesn't have anything inside winning a championship. It just doesn't happen, and I don't think it's ever happened. I think if you can go back and look at the teams that win championships, they at least have a serviceable guy down low to put the ball in the basket when they need to and make it easier on the offense. So there's my tip.
Okay, it's a good tip. Zach, over to you.
I guess one tip I'd have, one team I'm big on is Nebraska. Got them winning a couple games, came real close to putting them in the Elite Eight, maybe just to make me feel better about the 2 games we lost them this year, even though that'd be silly, as you all know, having watched the games. My Final Four is Michigan State, Wichita State, Florida, and who else do I have? Wisconsin, who I'm always hesitant to pick to win even one game in the tournament. So I guess one more tip I would have is Wichita State. Pretty much everybody's out on them, I feel like, just because of how tough that region is. I'm big on them. I really think that they're going to make some noise.
Okay, and as far as I go, let me be the first of 800 people who remind you over the next 2 weeks that Keith Appling and Adrian Payne, if they don't make a Final Four, would be the only 4-year players under Tom Izzo not to make a Final Four. And based on what I saw them do in the Big Ten tournament, now that they're healthy, they're my pick. I'm riding the Spartans all the way. I trust Tom Izzo. Some coaches just know how to coach in the tournament format and get the best out of their players. I realized, it's a very good roster. It's not a perfect roster, and they're going to have some tough matchups along the way. But I like the Spartans. I've also got, I think, Louisville, Florida, and Arizona in my Final Four. So, I like those 4 seeds, Louisville and Michigan State. I don't know there were really any low seeds that jumped out at me. I think I had Harvard winning their first-round game, Providence winning a few. But, my big tip is don't chase the upsets in round 1 because, they're so hard to predict, So, if you have a real strong feeling about 1 or 2, fine, take that, but don't try and pick like 8 upsets in round 1 because there's not going to be that many of them. A lot of the upsets actually happen more in the round of 32. And so what you really want to do is get to the Sweet 16 with 12, 13 teams, 14 teams left, and then you've got a real shot. If you try and pick all these upsets early, I think you're going to hurt yourself more than you help yourself. So anyway, those are my final tips. And with that said, let's go to some final thoughts and let's close out our final show of the 2013-14 season, a show that I guess, as the season was going along, it kind of, especially towards the end there, it kind of felt like the season couldn't end fast enough. But, now knowing that we won't have these a couple times a week, it's a little sad. I'm going to miss you guys. Not going to necessarily miss this team or miss saying the same things over and over again 2 times a week, but I'll certainly miss us getting together and miss being able to hang out with all the fans. And real quick, Andy, as I transition over to you here for the final thought, Megan has a question for you. And I just put up the wrong one. Her question is, her feed's a little weak. Does your screen say that you don't read your Twitter either?
It does, and luckily I clearly did not read that on Twitter, so I'm holding true to my word. So I'm really trying to get over whatever it is that people think I have against Green, and just trying to be more like him, and really trying to recreate myself in his image. So from here on out, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, so which proverb is going to be your final thought then?
Oh boy, yeah, I knew that was coming. I'm not sure I'm in a good position to really throw any out that are real or legitimate or pertinent to this situation, so I won't. As far as final thoughts, probably the only thing that I'm, as you mentioned, it's always fun to kind of talk and interact with people on Twitter, all kidding aside, and through the show and things like that. That regardless of how the season is going, and this one was certainly more frustrating than most, is something that we've all come to enjoy quite a bit through our time in doing the show. So that I will certainly miss, but I would probably be lying if I said there wasn't a big part of me that was just glad this was over, which is never a place that you really want to be in. I think about, kind of not really wanting to, the season end a couple years ago with the loss to Kentucky and all those things. There's some seasons that you don't want to end because you think the team might, still has a lot left in the tank. I think the tank was empty for this team, and I'm not really sure that no matter how much I can say they should have won the CBI had they played in it, I'm not sure they would have. And I think ultimately that's probably one of the reasons that I was in support of not doing it. I think this team, the tank was empty, and for whatever those reasons are, and try to fix that next year, I think, like both of you, it became tiresome to feel like we were saying the same things over and over again. But we kept watching the same thing over and over again, and at some point I don't really know what else you say. So, this will certainly not be a memorable season for me, and if you ask me about this one in 5 years, I probably won't remember a great deal about it, and that's probably how I'll want it to be based on how I'm remembering it right now. So definitely, sad for the show to be over. We'll do some stuff in the off season, and still keep it together in that regard. But for the season itself, I think I probably speak for a lot of people in saying that good riddance.
Absolutely. Okay, Ryan, over to you. Your final thoughts.
Well, for those of you fans that enjoyed my good Sheehy and bad Sheehy hashtags, I am officially retiring them unless he winds up in the NBA, and then I'll just love to do them constantly. But it was a tough year for everybody. I think players, I'm sure it was a really tough year, and for our coaching staff too. It was tough to be here. I can't imagine what it was inside the locker room. I think there's a lot of talent on this team going forward, regardless of what happens with Noah. I think that you've got a ton of talent coming back. From a pure talent standpoint, I don't really think anybody outpaces us in the Big Ten. The question is putting that talent to use and making it, work properly together. And so that's the job of everybody this offseason, and hopefully the entire roster channels Victor Oladipo and just goes nuts working out. Because for this team, as soon as they were eliminated from the NIT and said they weren't going to play in the CBI, the off season and next season started. Right now is next season, and they need to work like it is next season already, and put in the work. And I'm fine with them taking a week off. I know a couple of the guys went back home, and some went on vacation, and that's fine. But as soon as they get back to campus, they gotta prepare like it's next season already, and it started, and I'm ready for next season. Hopefully, you guys are too.
Mm-hmm. All right, Zach, and your final thoughts. Now, where are you going to be next year, Zach? Are you still going to be in Bloomington?
I don't think I'll be in Bloomington. Like I said earlier, I'm graduating in May. Don't know where I'll be yet. Wish I could tell you, but hopefully I'll have that resolved soon. But either way, I'll be here with the assembly call. That much I can guarantee. Good. But my final thought is that, going off of what Ryan was saying about this next season starting now, the countdown's on. It's like you said, it's time to get ready. And for me, as much as I hate to admit it, as much as I wish I could take, a a total breather and step away completely from Indiana basketball, I'm already excited for next year. There's going to be a lot to be frustrated about, and I know that's what people are focusing on just because of how this year wound up. And we could nitpick about what the holes on next year's team will probably be. But like I said, there's just a lot to be excited about. That's what I'm going to focus on for now. We all went through the season together. It was not fun, and when it was fun, the fun did not last very long. So just get excited. We don't have to deal with this crappy season anymore. Try to win some money off your bracket. Enjoy what is left of the college basketball season, and then move on to the next stage in Hoosier basketball.
Yeah, it always stinks when there's a selection Sunday and your team isn't involved. You want to be part of that discussion, part of that fun, and I think that's what's so disappointing about the end of the season. And obviously, the entire season was just disappointing with the ups and the downs, and mostly the downs and the losses that didn't need to be losses, and just the lack of development, all that stuff, and the way the team played and the way the team didn't develop really killed a lot of hopes and expectations. But I'm glad that, it sounds like with you guys, I know with me, and I think as we get some distance from this season with the majority of the fan base, it hasn't killed, kind of that hope and optimism that you always have as an Indiana fan that, hey, you have this rough season, this season kind of on the brink, and, you can get off of it and move on the next season. And so I think there's still that hope there. 'Cause Ryan, like you said, there's still a lot of talent. And, if that talent can now be molded into a cohesive team, which this year's never was, then I think brighter days can be ahead next year. And, if it doesn't, again, that's going to be something that's really going to have to be dealt with much more sternly, much more seriously than it is being dealt with right now. And so next year is a really important season in a lot of ways. But like you guys, I'm excited for it. I mean, I wish Hoosier Hysteria was next weekend, and I want to get there, but I think taking some time, getting some distance from this year, hopefully the guys have a great offseason, and we can enter Hoosier Hysteria with a lot of excitement, build on that, and build some positive momentum against a tougher schedule early on that'll carry us into Big Ten season. And hopefully we have much more of a team next year, because that's always my biggest disappointment is when the team doesn't seem like a team out there, and you kind of feel like you're watching individuals and not a team of Indiana Hoosiers. And it felt like that at times this year. And Andy, you mentioned being upset when the season ended a couple years ago. I loved watching that team play. Every second. It was just they were such a joy to watch, and this team made it hard to watch. And so, if nothing else, I just hope next year's team is a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable to watch, and plays the game of basketball better and more together. Because that's when the game is fun, is when you play it together. And we just didn't see enough of that this year, and that's what led to the disappointment. Hopefully reversing that can lead to better times, and we close this chapter, start a new one next year, and hopefully it's a much happier read for everybody. With that said, we close this season of the Assembly Call, but we will not be going away for good this offseason. Get on our email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. We have some fun stuff planned. We'll keep in touch with you. We'll send out any fun updates that we have, run some contests, do a lot of stuff. So get on there. And again, assemblycall.com/bracket, get your bracket in. Otherwise, thank you very much for all of your support, for joining us on the live broadcast after the games, the good ones, the bad ones. We really appreciate it. You all make this worth doing, make it fun for us. To everybody who's subscribed on iTunes and listens the next day on their drive home or their drive to work, thank you too. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to continue growing this community, getting it bigger, and hopefully next year we can even do a road trip to Bloomington, because that's certainly my goal, is to get all of us together, maybe do a broadcast live from Bloomington and get a chance to meet a lot of you. That would be great. So hopefully we can make that happen. Otherwise, enjoy your off season, enjoy the rest of the tournament, and we will talk to you on the next episode of the Assembly Call. Talk to you soon, everybody.